Jake Morrison stared at the message on his screen for the third time that morning. The words had not changed. His uncle Carl was dead, and somehow Jake had inherited something from him. This was strange because Jake barely knew his uncle, and they had not spoken in over 10 years. Carl Morrison was the black sheep of the family, always getting into trouble with different alien governments across the galaxy. Jake remembered his parents whispering about Carl's illegal activities when they, thought Jake was not listening. The message came from Kepler Station, a rough trading post on the edge of human space. Carl had died in their prison 3 days ago. Heart failure, the report said. Jake was listed as his only living relative, which meant everything Carl owned now belonged to Jake. The problem was that Jake worked as a xenobiologist on the research, ship Terran explorer, and he had no interest in whatever criminal enterprise his uncle had been running. Jake walked down the narrow corridor of the ship toward Commander Helen Torres's office. The Terran Explorer was not a large vessel, but it was home to 50 researchers and crew members who studied alien life forms throughout this sector of space. Jake had been working here for 5 years and loved his job. He studied how different alien species lived and survived in harsh environments. It was peaceful work that helped him stay far away from the kind of trouble his uncle always found. Commander Torres looked up when Jake knocked on her door. She was a stern woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had been running exploration missions for 20 years. Nothing surprised her anymore, or so Jake thought until he explained his situation. "Your Uncle Carl Morrison," she said slowly. "I know that name. He was arrested 6 months ago for smuggling rare alien artifacts. The authorities had been hunting him for years." Jake felt his stomach drop. "What kind of artifacts?" "The dangerous kind. Weapons, illegal biotechnology, sometimes even living creatures that were protected by interspecies treaties." Torres leaned back in her chair. "What exactly did he leave? You?" "The message just says I need to come to Kepler Station to claim my inheritance. They would not give me details over subspace communication." Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Take the next transport shuttle. But Jake, be very careful. Your uncle's business associates are not the kind of people you want to meet in a dark alley." 3 days later, Jake found himself standing in the cargo bay of Kepler Station, facing a large metal container. The station manager, a thin man named Pete Collins, handed him a data pad with official documents. "Your uncle paid for this container's storage for 1 full year, Collins explained. "He died with 3 months left on the contract. The contents are yours now, but I have to warn you, nobody else wanted it. Even the other criminals avoided this particular item." Jake signed the papers, and Collins activated the container's opening mechanism. As the metal door slid up, a terrible smell hit Jake's nose. It was like rotting meat mixed with something chemical and bitter. Inside the container was a smaller transparent cage about the size of a large doghouse, and inside that cage was something Jake had never seen before. The creature was clearly a baby dragon, but unlike any dragon species Jake knew from his studies. It was completely white, almost transparent, with scales that looked like they were made of glass. But the most disturbing thing was that Jake could see through its skin to what was underneath. Millions of tiny worm-like creatures were moving, around inside the dragon's body, crawling under its scales and through its flesh. "What is it?" Jake whispered. "Xerion Drake," Collins answered. "But this one is defective. See, normal Xerion Drakes are bright red, and they are the most feared predators in their home system. This white one is what they call an albino, the Xerion. People believe albino drakes are cursed, and they abandon them to die. This one also has a parasite infection that makes it even more worthless. The baby dragon was barely moving. Its breathing was shallow, and its eyes were closed. Jake could see that it was dying. Your uncle bought it from a Xerion trader who wanted to get rid of it quickly," Collins continued. "Paid good money for it, too, though nobody knows why. The thing has been sitting here for months getting sicker." Jake knelt down next to the cage. The dragon was small, probably no bigger than a house cat. Its white scales were dull and several had fallen off. The parasites under its skin moved constantly, creating rippling patterns across its body. Most people would have been disgusted, but Jake felt something different. As a xenobiologist, he was curious. Why would his uncle buy a dying creature that nobody else wanted? "There are some data files that came with it," Collins said, handing Jake another data pad. "Your uncle's research notes, I think." Jake spent the next hour reading through his uncle's files. Carl had not been just a smuggler, he had been searching for something specific. The notes mentioned ancient Xerion legends about white dragons and their special abilities. Carl believed that the parasites were not actually harmful, but were some kind of symbiotic organism that only appeared in genetically special dragons. The problem was that nobody had ever been able to prove this theory because albino Xerion drakes always died young. Their own people abandoned them and no other species wanted to care for such a disgusting creature. But Carl had found references to old stories about white dragons that could do impossible things when they were properly cared for. Jake looked at the dying dragon again. It opened its eyes for a moment and looked directly at him. Despite its sickly appearance, its eyes were intelligent and aware. Jake made a decision that would change his life forever. "I am taking it with me," he told Collins. Collins laughed. "You are crazy. That thing will probably die before you get back to your ship." "And even if it lives, what are you going to do with a parasite-infected dragon? Your crew will never allow it on board." Jake was already arranging for a portable life support system. "I will figure something out." As he prepared to transport the dragon back to the Terran explorer, Jake wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. But something about the creature called to him. Maybe it was his scientific curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper. Either way, he was committed now. The white dragon was coming home with him. The reaction Jake expected came immediately when he returned to the Terran explorer with his new companion. Dr. Lisa Chang from the medical department took one look at the white dragon and backed away from Jake's quarters. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "That creature is a biological hazard. I can see the parasites moving under its skin from here. If those organisms spread to the crew, we could have a ship-wide infection." Jake had placed the dragon in a modified quarantine chamber in his room. The creature lay motionless on a soft blanket, breathing slowly and irregularly. Its white scales had become even more transparent, making the writhing parasites underneath clearly visible. "I have it contained," Jake argued. "The chamber has its own air filtration system, and the parasites cannot survive outside their host." "You do not know that for certain," Dr. Chang replied. "We know almost nothing about Xerion biology, especially abnormal specimens like this one. I am recommending to Commander Torres that the creature be jettisoned immediately." After Dr. Chang left, Jake sat alone with the dragon. He had named it Frost because of its pale coloring, though he was not even sure if it was male or female. Xerion dragons were difficult to study because their species was very protective of their biological secrets. Most of what humans knew came from brief encounters and second-hand reports. Jake opened his uncle's research files again and began reading more carefully. Carl had spent years collecting information about albino Xerion drakes. According to the old legends, these white dragons were not cursed but blessed. The parasites, which the files called void worms, were actually a symbiotic organism that only bonded with genetically superior dragons. The problem was that Xerion society viewed any deviation from their normal red coloring as shameful and wrong. But the most interesting part of Carl's research was his theory about why the white dragons always died young. Carl believed it was not because of the parasites, but because of neglect and abandonment. No one had ever tried to properly care for an albino drake. No one had ever given them the emotional support and attention they needed to survive. Jake looked at Frost, lying in the chamber. The dragon's breathing was getting weaker. Without thinking, Jake opened the chamber and reached inside to gently touch Frost's head. The scales felt warm and smooth, not slimy or diseased as he had expected. "Hey there," Jake said softly. "I know you are scared and sick, but I am going to take care of you." To his surprise, Frost opened its eyes and looked at him. The dragon's eyes were a pale blue color, almost white like the rest of its body. But they were alert and intelligent. Frost made a small sound, barely more than a whisper, that sounded almost like a purr. Jake began visiting Frost every few hours, talking to the dragon while he worked on his regular research projects. He started bringing food samples that might be suitable for a young Zarian drake. Most of the crew avoided his quarters entirely, but Jake did not mind. He found that he enjoyed the dragon's company. After a week, something unexpected happened. Jake was working late in his quarters when he suddenly felt dizzy and nauseous. At first, he thought he was getting sick, but then he realized the feeling was not coming from his own body. Somehow he was sensing Frost's physical condition. The dragon was hungry and in pain. Jake quickly prepared a nutrient solution and offered it to Frost. As the dragon drank, Jake felt the hunger sensation fade away. This was impossible according to everything he knew about xenobiology, but it was definitely happening. Over the next few days, the connection between Jake and Frost grew stronger. Jake began to sense the dragon's emotions as well as its physical needs. Frost was not just sick, it was lonely and afraid. It had been abandoned by its own kind and expected the same treatment from Jake. Jake started spending more time talking to Frost, even singing old songs his mother had taught him when he was young. The dragon seemed to respond to Jake's voice, and would often make soft, purring sounds when Jake sang. Slowly, Frost began to eat more and its breathing improved. But then the real crisis hit. Several crew members reported feeling strange symptoms, headaches, and mood changes that seemed to come from nowhere. Dr. Chang immediately blamed Frost and demanded that Commander Torres remove the creature from the ship. "The dragon is affecting the crew's neurochemistry," Dr. Chang explained during an emergency meeting. "Some kind of psychic contamination. If we do not get rid of it now, the entire ship could be compromised." Commander Torres looked tired and frustrated. "Jake, I know you care about this creature, but I cannot risk the safety of my crew. The dragon has to go." Jake felt panic rising in his chest, but it was not his own panic. It was Frost's. The dragon could somehow sense the threat and was becoming more distressed. This distress was being transmitted to the crew, making everyone more agitated. "Wait," Jake said. "I think I understand what is happening. The dragon is not trying to hurt anyone. It is scared and its fear is affecting us. Let me try something." Jake hurried back to his quarters where Frost was thrashing around in the chamber, making distressed crying sounds. Jake opened the chamber and carefully lifted the dragon out, holding it against his chest like a frightened child. "It is okay," Jake whispered. "You are safe. I am not going to let anyone hurt you." As Jake held Frost and spoke calmly, he felt the dragon's panic begin to fade. The connection between them grew stronger, and Jake realized he could actually communicate basic emotions and ideas to Frost through their bond. He projected feelings of safety and protection, and Frost responded by becoming calmer. Within an hour, the crew members reported that their symptoms had disappeared. Dr. Chang was baffled but had to admit that whatever had been affecting everyone was gone. That night, Jake lay in his bed with Frost curled up next to him like a cat. The dragon was still small and fragile, but its breathing was stronger and its scales had begun to regain some of their luster. The parasites under its skin were still visible, but they seemed to be moving in more organized patterns now. Jake realized that his uncle had been right about one thing. The white dragons were special, but not in the way the Zarion people believed. They were not cursed, they were evolved. They had the ability to form emotional and psychic bonds with other intelligent species. The Zarion, with their rigid traditions, and fear of anything different had been throwing away their greatest gift. As Jake drifted off to sleep, he felt Frost's contentment flowing through their bond. For the first time since leaving its homeworld, the little dragon was not alone, and neither was Jake. They were partners now, though Jake had no idea how much their lives were about to change. In the morning, Jake would discover that Frost had grown several inches during the night and that the parasites had formed new patterns under its scales. The real adventure was just beginning. 3 months had passed since Jake brought Frost aboard the Terran Explorer, and the changes were remarkable. The small white dragon that had once been dying in a cage was now the size of a large dog and growing every day. Its scales had transformed, from dull and transparent to a brilliant pearl white that seemed to glow with inner light. The parasites under its skin had organized themselves into intricate patterns that shifted and moved like living artwork. The most amazing change was the bond between Jake and Frost. What had started as simple emotional connection had evolved into something much deeper. They could share thoughts, images, and even memories through their psychic link. Jake had learned that Frost was female and that she remembered, being cast out by her own people when she was just a few days old. The rejection had left deep emotional scars that were only now beginning to heal. Dr. Chang had become fascinated by the transformation. Her initial fear had turned to scientific curiosity as she studied the unique physiology of the human dragon, Bond. She discovered that Jake's DNA contained trace markers that resonated with the symbiotic organisms living inside Frost. These organisms, which everyone had called parasites, were actually fragments of some kind of collective consciousness that could only be activated by the right genetic trigger. "It is incredible," Dr. Chang explained to Jake during one of their research sessions. "The organisms in Frost's body are not harming her. They are enhancing her natural abilities. Her strength, intelligence, and psychic powers have all increased dramatically since she bonded with you." Jake could feel the truth of this through his connection with Frost. The dragon was becoming something far beyond what a normal Zarian drake could achieve. She could phase through solid objects for short periods, her hearing and sight were incredibly sharp, and she was developing new abilities almost daily. The crew of the Terran Explorer had gradually accepted Frost as part of their community. Communications. Officer Amy Rodriguez was particularly fascinated by the patterns that appeared under Frost's scales. She spent hours studying them and eventually realized they matched star charts of regions beyond known Zirion space. "Look at this," Amy showed Jake a comparison between Frost's scale patterns and galactic navigation maps. "These markings correspond to unexplored sectors that we have never visited. It is like she carries a map of the universe in her body." Captain Roy Bennett had been skeptical of keeping Frost on board at first, but even he had to admit that the dragon was proving useful. Frost could detect mechanical problems in the ship's systems before the computers registered them. She could sense approaching vessels long before they appeared on sensors. Most importantly, she seemed to have an instinctive understanding of space navigation that surpassed their best equipment. But the real test of their partnership came when the Terran Explorer received an emergency distress call. A Zirian colony on the planet Valdris was under attack by ships from the Hive Collective, a mechanical species that consumed biological life to fuel their expansion. The colonial government was requesting assistance from any vessels in the area. "Captain," Bennett called a meeting of the senior officers. "The Zirion colony has about 10,000 civilians and they are completely outmatched. The nearest military fleet is 3 days away. We are their only hope." "But we are a research vessel," Dr. Chong pointed out. "We have minimal weapons and no military training." "We have something else," Jake said, looking at Frost, who was lying at his feet. "We have abilities that the Hive has never encountered before." The journey to Valdris took 18 hours, and Jake spent most of that time preparing with Frost. Through their bond, he learned that she had instinctive knowledge about fighting the hive. The mechanical beings were vulnerable to certain frequencies of energy that normal Xerion fire could not produce. But Frost's enhanced abilities, powered by her symbiotic organisms, might be different. When they arrived at Valdris, the situation was desperate. 3 large hive ships were systematically destroying the colony's defenses, while smaller craft landed troops on the surface. The Xerion defenders were brave, but their traditional weapons were barely slowing the mechanical invaders. The Terran explorer was immediately contacted by Prime Drake Zoreth, the leader of the colony's military forces. His image appeared on the ship's main screen, showing a massive red dragon with battle scars covering his scales. "Human vessel, you must retreat immediately," Zoreth commanded. "This battle is beyond your capabilities and we cannot protect you." "We are here to help," Captain Bennett replied. "We have unique resources that might be effective against the hive." Zoreth's eyes narrowed when he saw Frost standing next to Jake. "You bring an abomination to our world in our time of greatest need? That pale creature is a disgrace to all dragons." Jake felt anger flash through his bond with Frost, but the dragon remained calm. She had faced this kind of rejection her entire life. "Give us a chance to prove ourselves," Jake said. "Judge us by our actions, not by appearances." Before Zoreth could respond, alarms sounded throughout the ship. A hive attack craft was approaching the Terran explorer with obvious hostile intent. The mechanical ship fired energy weapons that would have destroyed their shields in seconds. But Frost reacted faster than anyone expected. She breathed out a stream of silver flame that struck the hive ship and caused its weapons to shut down completely. The attacking craft began spinning out of control as its systems failed one by one. The bridge of the Terran explorer fell silent. Even Jake was shocked by what Frost had accomplished. Her fire had not just damaged the hive ship, it had completely disabled all of its technology. "Impossible," Zoreth whispered from the communication screen. "No dragon fire can affect hive machinery." Frost looked directly at the Xerion commander, and Jake felt her determination through their bond. She was tired of being called an abomination. She was ready to show everyone what she was truly capable of. "Let us help save your people," Jake said. "We can do things that normal dragons cannot." Jake and Frost worked together over the next few hours in ways that amazed everyone watching. They could phase through the hulls of hive ships, appearing inside where the mechanical beings could not target them effectively. Frost's silver flame disabled entire vessels, while Jake used his knowledge of technology to sabotage critical systems. But the most impressive moment came when they rescued a group of Xerion civilians trapped in a collapsed building. Frost used her enhanced strength to lift massive concrete beams, while Jake coordinated the rescue through their psychic link. They worked as one mind in 2 bodies, anticipating each other's actions perfectly. Elder Drake Kalen, an ancient Xerion warrior, watched the rescue operation with growing amazement. "I have never seen anything like this," he admitted to Zoreth. "The human and the white dragon fight as though they share one soul." By the end of the battle, 3 hive ships had been disabled and the mechanical forces on the ground were in full retreat. The colony was saved and the impossible had been proven possible. A despised albino dragon and her human partner had accomplished what the proud Xerion military could not. As the Terran explorer prepared to leave Valdris, Zoreth contacted them one final time. His attitude had completely changed. "Human Jake, Morrison and Dragonfrost, you have earned the gratitude of our people. Perhaps we have been wrong about the white ones." Jake felt Frost's satisfaction through their bond. For the first time in her life, she had been accepted by her own kind. But more importantly, she had found her true purpose. She was not meant to be like other dragons. She was meant to be something new, something better. The partnership between human and dragon was just beginning to show its potential. The success at Valdris had changed everything for Jake and Frost. Word of their victory spread quickly through Zarian space and reached the ears of the High Council on Zarian Prime. For the first time in over 1,000 years, they were being asked to reconsider their treatment of albino dragons. Prime Drake Zoreth himself had sent a formal request that Jake and Frost be invited to the sacred dragon sanctuaries for study and evaluation. Captain Bennett was both excited and nervous about the invitation. This could be a historic moment for human-Zarian relations, he told Jake, but it could also be very dangerous. The Zarian are proud and they do not like admitting they were wrong about anything. Jake understood the risks, but he also felt this was important through his bond with Frost. The dragon had grown to full adult size now, nearly 8 feet long from nose to tail, with a wingspan that barely fit in the ship's corridors. The patterns under her scales had become even more complex and seemed to pulse with their own inner light. She was magnificent, and Jake wanted her own people to see what they had been throwing away. The journey to Zarion Prime took 5 days, and Jake spent most of that time learning about Zarion history and culture. Dr. Chang had compiled everything the human databases contained about their species. The Zarion were an ancient race that had evolved alongside their dragons in a symbiotic relationship. Unlike humans who had domesticated animals, the Zarion and their dragons were true partners who shared thoughts and emotions. But somewhere in their past, the Zarion had become obsessed with genetic purity and conformity. Dragons that did not match their ideal of crimson scales and golden eyes were considered flawed and dangerous. The practice of abandoning albino offspring had continued for so long that most Zarian believed it was a natural law rather than a cultural choice. When they arrived at Zarian Prime, Jake was amazed by what he saw. The planet was covered in massive, crystalline cities that spiraled up from the surface like frozen tornadoes. Dragons flew between the structures in organized patterns while their Zarion partners rode on their backs or walked through transparent tubes that connected the buildings. They were met by Elder Drake Kalen, the same ancient warrior who had witnessed their performance at Valdris. His dragon, a massive creature called Thunderwing, was so large that its presence made the Terran explorer seem small by comparison. "Welcome to our world, Jake Morrison and Frost," Kalen said formally. "You have been granted an audience with High Lore Keeper Vis and access to the sanctuaries of memory. This is an honor that has not been given to any outsider in living memory." Jake felt nervous excitement from Frost as they flew through the crystal cities toward the sanctuaries. These were the oldest structures on Zarion Prime, built from some kind of living stone that seemed to grow rather than having been constructed. Inside the main sanctuary, walls were covered with carvings that told the history of the Zarian people going back millions of years. High Lorekeeper Vis was the oldest Zarion Jake had ever seen. Her scales had faded to a dull bronze color, and her eyes held the weight of centuries of knowledge. Her dragon companion, Ancient, was so old that parts of its body had begun to crystallize, making it look more like a living statue than a creature of flesh and blood. "So," Vice said, studying Frost carefully, "you are the White One who has bonded with a Sky Wanderer. The legend spoke of this day, but we had begun to believe they were only stories." Jake felt confusion from Frost and realized the dragon did not understand what was being discussed. "What legends?" Jake asked. Vis led them deeper into the sanctuary to a chamber filled with the oldest carvings. The walls showed images of white dragons bonded with strange beings that Jake slowly realized were meant to represent humans. "These are the prophecies of the Pale Ones," Vis explained. "They speak of a time when the white dragons would return, bonded to sky wanderers from beyond our world, to herald a new age for our people." Dr. Chang, who had been quietly recording everything, stepped forward. "These carvings look ancient. How old are they?" "Over 2 million years," Vis replied. "From the time before our people achieved spaceflight." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Humans had only achieved spaceflight a few hundred years ago. How could ancient Xerion carvings show human-dragon partnerships from millions of years in the past? Vis seemed to read his thoughts. You wonder how this is possible. The answer lies in understanding what you call parasites and what we call the void touched. She led them to another chamber where crystalline containers held samples of the symbiotic organisms. Under powerful magnification, Jake could see that they were not actually worm-like creatures at all. They were fragments of some kind of energy, being semi-solid manifestations of pure consciousness. Long ago, before our species evolved physical form, we existed as beings of pure thought and energy, Vis explained. When we chose to take physical shape, most of our consciousness transferred into these bodies. But some fragments remained in the void between thoughts, waiting for the right conditions to manifest again. Dr. Chang was fascinated. You are saying these organisms are actually pieces of ancient Xerion consciousness? Yes, but consciousness that can only be awakened by a specific genetic resonance. The albino dragons carry the right biological frequency, but they also need a catalyst, a partner whose DNA contains the proper activation codes. Jake felt understanding dawning. Humans have these activation codes in our DNA. Yes, Vis confirmed. Because your species are our descendants. Millions of years ago, a Xerion exploration vessel crashed on a primitive world you call Earth. The survivors bred with early human ancestors, leaving traces of our genetic markers in your bloodline. You are our lost children, returning home, at last. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. Humans were part Xerion. That was why he could bond with Frost, why the symbiotic organisms responded to his presence. He was not an alien caring for a dragon. He was family reconnecting with family. Frost pressed against his side, and Jake felt waves of emotion through their bond, joy, wonder, and a deep sense of rightness. She had always known somehow that their connection was more than simple partnership. But Vice's expression grew dark. Unfortunately, this reunion comes at a time of great danger. The Hive Collective has been monitoring our communications, and they understand the threat that awakened. Void touched represent. A massive armada is approaching our space, intent on destroying both our species before this new evolution can spread. As if summoned by her words, alarms began sounding throughout the sanctuary. Emergency broadcasts filled the air as watch stations, reported hundreds of Hive ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. How long do we have? Jake asked. Perhaps 6 hours before they reach Xerion Prime, Vis replied grimly. Our military forces are already moving to intercept them, but the Hive numbers are overwhelming. Jake felt determination flowing through his bond with Frost. They had saved one colony together. Now they would have to help save an entire civilization. But this time, they would not be fighting alone. The secret of the White Dragons was finally revealed, and other human-dragon pairs could be formed. The greatest battle in galactic history was about to begin, and Jake and Frost would be at the center of it. The evolution of two species hung in the balance, and the outcome would determine the future of the galaxy itself. Through the sanctuary's crystal walls, Jake could see the first explosions lighting up the darkness of space as the Hive Armada engaged the Xerion defense fleet. The real test of the human-dragon partnership was about to begin. The Hive Armada was unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. Through the crystal walls of the sanctuary, he watched thousands of mechanical ships blot out the stars above Xerion Prime. Each vessel was a perfect geometric shape, built for maximum efficiency and destruction. Their surfaces gleamed with an oily black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. High Lorekeeper Vis stood beside him, her ancient face grim with worry. In all our recorded history, we have never faced a threat of this magnitude. The Hive has brought enough ships to sterilize every planet in our system. The first wave of battle reports came in quickly. The The Xerian defense fleet, despite their bravery and skill, was being systematically destroyed. Traditional dragon fire proved useless against the Hive's adaptive shielding technology. Within the first hour, half of the defending ships had been eliminated. Jake felt Frost's urgency through their bond. The dragon understood that conventional warfare would not save her people. They needed to use their unique abilities, but they could not do it alone. Jake had an idea that seemed impossible, but their entire situation had been impossible from the beginning. "The crew of the Terran Explorer," Jake said to Vice. "They have been exposed to Frost's presence for months. Is it possible that some of them could bond with other albino dragons?" Vis's eyes widened with understanding. "There are 12 albino hatchlings in the sanctuary nurseries. They were to be disposed of according to traditional law, but we had delayed the process because of your arrival." Dr. Chang grabbed Jake's arm. "The genetic resonance markers. If humans really are descended from ancient Xerion, then theoretically any human with the right bloodline could form a bond." They rushed through the sanctuary corridors toward the nurseries, dodging falling debris as Hive bombardment began hitting the planet's surface. The baby albino dragons were kept in a separate chamber, isolated from the normal hatchlings. Jake's heart broke when he saw them. They were small and weak, clearly malnourished and neglected, but when Frost entered the chamber, something magical happened. The baby dragons immediately perked up, their scales beginning to glow with the same inner light that Frost possessed. Jake realized that proximity to a healthy bonded dragon was helping to awaken their dormant potential. Captain Bennett, Dr. Chang, Communications Officer Amy Rodriguez, and several other crew members had followed them to the sanctuary. Jake quickly explained what needed to happen. "This is completely theoretical," Dr. Chang warned. "We do not know if the bonding process will work or what the side effects might be." "We know what the side effects of doing nothing will be," Captain Bennett replied grimly, looking out at the battle raging in space. "If we do not try this, everyone on this planet dies anyway." One by one, the crew members approached the albino hatchlings. Jake watched through his bond with Frost as each human made contact with a baby dragon. The process was different for everyone, but the results were unmistakable. Amy Rodriguez bonded with a small female dragon she named Echo. Dr. Chang connected with a slightly larger male she called Helix. Captain Bennett formed a partnership with the largest of the hatchlings, an ancient-looking creature he named Storm. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Each bonded pair began to glow with shared energy as the void-touched organisms activated within the dragons. Jake felt the connections forming through his link with Frost, creating a network of consciousness that spanned multiple minds. But there was no time to explore these new relationships. The Hive ground forces had begun landing on Xerion Prime, and the planetary defenses were crumbling. Jake and the newly bonded pairs rushed toward the surface, where they found chaos and destruction spreading through the crystal cities. The Hive warriors were terrifying mechanical beings that moved with perfect coordination. They had no individual consciousness, only a collective drive to consume and convert biological life into mechanical components. Their weapons could disintegrate living tissue while leaving technology intact. Jake and Frost launched into battle, alongside their friends. The silver flame that had disabled one Hive ship at Valdris now proved effective against entire squadrons. But more importantly, the bonded pairs could coordinate their attacks with perfect timing. Amy and Echo manipulated electromagnetic fields to create shields that protected civilians. Dr. Chang and Helix could phase through solid matter to appear anywhere on the battlefield instantly. Captain Bennett and Storm demonstrated the most devastating ability. Storm's silver fire could ignite entire formations of Hive warriors, creating chain reactions that spread through their mechanical network. But it was the combination of human tactical thinking and dragon instinct that made them truly formidable. As the battle raged, more Xerion began to understand what was happening. Elder Drake Kalen arrived with a group of traditional red dragons, but instead of fighting alongside the human-dragon pairs, he watched in amazement as they achieved impossible victories. "This is not how dragons are supposed to fight," one of Kalen's companions protested. "They move as one mind across multiple bodies. It is unnatural." "No," Kalen replied, watching Jake and Frost work in perfect harmony. "This is how dragons were always meant to fight. We have forgotten our true nature." The turning point came when Jake realized that the battle was bigger than just the physical confrontation. Through his bond with Frost, he could sense the void-touched consciousness that connected all the awakened dragons. It was vast and ancient, a collective intelligence that had been waiting millions of years to fully manifest. Jake made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. He opened his mind completely to the network, allowing the void-touched consciousness to flow through him. Frost did the same, and suddenly they were connected not just to their bonded friends, but to the entire planet. The sensation was overwhelming. Jake could feel the thoughts and emotions of every living being on Zerion Prime. More importantly, he could access the planetary consciousness itself, the accumulated knowledge and power of millions of years of Zerion civilization. With Frost as his anchor, Jake channeled this cosmic awareness into a single focused attack. The planet's surface began to glow with the same silver light as dragonfire. Waves of energy pulsed outward from Zerion Prime, racing through space toward the Hive Armada. When the energy waves struck the mechanical ships, they did not just disable them. They fundamentally altered the quantum structure of the Hive technology, turning aggressive machines into harmless debris. The effect spread from ship to ship until the entire armada was neutralized, but the energy did not stop at Zerion space. It continued outward at faster-than-light speeds, reaching every corner of the galaxy where Hive forces operated. Enslaved worlds suddenly found their mechanical oppressors shutting down, civilizations that had been fighting hopeless wars against. The Hive watched their enemies simply cease to function. Jake collapsed from the effort, but he felt Frost's strength supporting him through their bond. Around them, the other human-dragon pairs were glowing with shared energy. Their consciousness expanded beyond anything they had thought possible. High Lorekeeper Vice arrived as the immediate crisis ended. Her ancient eyes were wide with wonder and perhaps a little fear. "What have you done?" she whispered. "We have become what we were always meant to be," Jake replied, still feeling the vast network of consciousness flowing through him. Not human or Zerion, but something new, something better. In the days that followed, the galaxy began to change in ways no one had anticipated. The destruction of the Hive Collective freed countless worlds and species. Human ships began arriving at Zerion Prime, drawn by reports of the miraculous victory. Soon, hundreds of humans were bonding with albino dragons, creating a new hybrid civilization that combined the best of both species. Jake found himself at the center of this transformation, but he never forgot the small white dragon that had started it all. Frost had grown from a despised outcast into the catalyst for the greatest evolutionary leap in galactic history. The parasites that everyone had seen as a curse had turned out to be the key to unlocking the true potential of two species. As Jake stood on the crystal balcony of the new human Zerion embassy, watching young children from both species learning to work with albino dragons, he reflected on how far they had come. Love and acceptance had transformed the most rejected creature in the galaxy into the savior of countless civilizations. The white dragons were no longer outcasts. They were the future, and that future belonged to everyone willing to embrace change and growth. Jake smiled as Frost settled beside him, her scales glowing softly in the evening light. Their story had ended, but the story of their people was just beginning.